Hi again, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Benefits. I'm Zoe Kobrin, along with your co-host, Mark DeFee. Hello, Mark.
Hey Zoe, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And we're also really happy today to have Sarah Gaer with us. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Zoe.
So today we are going to be talking about our upcoming event, our second annual Afternoon of Hope, which will be on September 10th from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time and virtual, so you can attend from anywhere.
And free. Don't forget
And
free.
free. That's right. Thank you. That's right. Important. And it's a really wonderful opportunity to hear from people who have been personally impacted by suicide, as well as to get some really helpful tips and strategies, just practical tools that everyone can use to support people who are in crisis, who are struggling with suicidal ideation. And we've invited Sarah here today to tell us a little bit about what she'll be speaking about during the Afternoon of Hope. Just for background, Sarah's a mental health professional with over 25 years of experience in trauma, addiction, and suicide prevention. She's a suicide prevention specialist and is a recognized speaker on soul exhaustion and mental health. Sarah also works in law enforcement mental health and the HOPE certification program, where she helps to advance evidence-based practices in mental health promotion. So Sarah, we could not have asked for a more appropriate person to be with us. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really always an honor to be asked to come in and speak.
Sarah, we'd love a little preview of what you'll be discussing during Afternoon of Hope. But first, maybe you could just tell us a little more about how you got into this line of work and about your journey.
Yeah. It's interesting because obviously a bio tells you certain things about a person, right? But there's parts of all of us that our bios don't capture. And I personally feel that the most important parts of me are captured in a bio, and that's my experience as a suicide loss survivor. In 1998, I lost my third and very best friend to suicide. She had been 21 years old for 6 days, and it was going to change everything. It was going to change my trajectory in my life, in my career, in my worldview. And here's the thing a lot of people don't realize is birds of a feather flock together. There was a reason why I had lost 3 friends to suicide, because I had found my community in a community of kids who all struggled and had had a lot of hardships and trauma. And so I was blessed in a lot of ways, because for as much trauma as I had, I also had some protective factors that my friends didn't have. And so I have taken that experience as a suicide loss survivor and I've brought it into everything that I do professionally. And it drives a lot of my work. And so that includes a program that I designed, I don't know how long ago anymore, but I started to feel like there's a lot of good things out there for dealing with somebody who's in the midst of a suicidal crisis. But in most instances, they don't just start off in a suicidal crisis. They spend days, weeks, months, and sometimes even years really struggling before that crisis comes. And I felt like we're not doing enough about that. And so I decided to do a little bit of informal research and reach out to people who had survived all different types of hardships in their lives. They've lived with substance use disorders, they lived with major mental health conditions or trauma. Some are suicide attempt survivors and some are suicide loss survivors. And I asked them, what are the things that have been really helpful to you when you were going through a hard time? Not a crisis, but a hard time. You would think they're common sense answers, but it turns out they're not. And we also asked, what are some of the things that you found harmful? Again, you might think some of them are common sense, but what I realized is that we all do those things, even myself. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you in my time is some of the do's and don'ts. Here's some things that if somebody's going through a hard time, it doesn't have to be a crisis. Here's some things that you can do that are really helpful to them. And here's some things that you can do that can make them feel worse. So let's try to avoid that.
I think that's so important because as a clinician working in the space of, workplace mental health, I hear so often people, feeling unqualified to have these conversations, but this fear of, I'm going to make it worse. I'm going to say the wrong thing. And now I'm going to live with the guilt of, not feeling prepared and stepping into this and making it worse. So I guess I say all that to say, what would you say to those individuals who are sitting there going, I don't know if I should do anything because I don't want to make it worse?
Well, I'm going to make it so much easier, right?
Okay.
Because it's really what we learned is this is easy. Obviously it's not, because we have to make a training about it, but there's some really easy things. First of all, to that whole idea of I'm not qualified. One of the things that we ask people is, when you were going through a hard time, not a crisis, but a hard time, where'd you turn? Who did you want support from? And I'm so sorry to everyone in the mental health field, but we therapists were pretty low on the list.
Yeah.
We weren't where people were going. And interestingly, they weren't going to their family either. The first place people reported going was to friends. And so this is interesting, because friends often feel like it's not my place, that's private, that's family's business, right? But it turns out, again, I'm not talking about in a crisis, I'm talking about when people are struggling, that the first place a lot of people turn is to their friends. So it turns out it is exactly our role as a friend. And without giving away the whole time you guys are going to come and see me, I will give you one little tidbit. That first and foremost, the most important thing people wanted and needed was someone to just listen, to truly, authentically, wholeheartedly just listen to what's going on. That's easy. We get ourselves in this idea of like, I have to know exactly what to say and when to say it and where to tell them to go, and let all that go, because the most important thing is that you truly just listen to them. I'm not giving anything else away though, Mark.
No, but I think you're right that it's so powerful, and it's something that we can all kind of, even those of us who are therapists, there's always room for just working on honing in those just listening skills, right? Not trying to fix it or change it, and I think that really speaks to, one of the things that we'll be doing in this training is, how can we as individuals like really be a support? How can organizations best support employees by creating a culture where people feel comfortable maybe coming forward and talking, saying, hey, I'm not okay. And what can leadership do, when they're in that position of wanting to support someone? So we're so excited to be able to hear the rest of your strategies, Sarah, but we really appreciate you sharing this in the meantime.
And I thought, when you're speaking there, Sarah, one thing I thought of was kind of that phrase, simple but not easy. What we're talking about, listening, that's pretty simple, but sometimes it's not easy, because we often want to get into problem solving mode so quickly. They're going to feel better if we can solve this for them, especially like in a workplace, where production, is pretty important. For me, I feel like that problem solving mindset that we can get into can be problematic at first.
That's so important. And I think, along the lines of not trying to problem solve, I think sometimes we have the best intentions and we tend to cheerlead, right? Like, oh, I'm sure it'll be okay. Or like, well, my sister's husband's sister went through that and they got better, or whatever it was, right? We want to offer something to make them feel better. But I think that can actually be more alienating and make them feel like they can't actually talk about how they're feeling. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And that comes from our own discomfort with this person being so sad. We want to make them feel better. So we're going to say this other story, right? But here's the thing. Things don't always turn out okay. So promising somebody or trying to convince them that it's gonna, that's not always fair. Because sometimes things don't turn out well.
Yeah.
And the other part is what you're actually saying to them is like, you're not a space where I'm allowed to have my feelings and fears and sadness and struggle right now. And so even though that's with the best of intent, it's also often not experienced in a positive way.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, another piece to that is, I think people want to believe, and this is true, their situation is unique. And if you say, oh, my, friend went through this, or my brother, or whatever, I think there's almost that knee jerk reaction. Well, you don't know what I'm going through. Uh, and they're true, and that's right. We don't. There are obviously similarities a lot of times, but I think that knee jerk reaction is because they are sitting there going, "You don't know how I feel. Don't act like you know how I feel."
Mark, I feel like you missed your calling as a lawyer because you are just like pulling all this information out of me that I was not going to get. But you're absolutely right. When we asked people things that were harmful, one of the things directly identified was when people try to compare what I'm going through to something that they've been through or someone else has been through. Right? Because sometimes people just need a little bit of space to be in their own experience, right? And we have such a hard time doing that, again, because of our own feelings, and we want to make the situation better. We want to make the person feel better. When they're not ready to think about your brothers, cousins, best friends, nephews, housekeepers,
Yeah.
sister-in-law, they're just not ready for it. And so I think it's really important also to ask, is this helpful?
Yeah. And I think just along those lines, the underlying theme of people being uncomfortable, but also sometimes just being afraid, right? And so a lot of times maybe organizations don't spend time talking about this topic because there's this fear of like giving people the idea, which of course we know is not, we're not going to give anybody that idea. We're just going to make them feel safer to be able to talk about it if they are having thoughts of suicide, right? Or even like in conversations with friends or colleagues, that fear might shut us down and make us not able to be a supporter to ask the questions. And so it's one of the reasons I'm so excited about what we're doing and really helping people to feel more empowered, right? To support the people around them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, learning how to be comfortable talking about suicide and how to ask someone if they're, experiencing suicidal despair is very, very important. But we also know that sometimes we don't do that until the person is in very serious trouble. And at that point, we can't always fix the situation in front of them. And that's why I like to focus on sort of that pre-crisis period. The other thing that we know is that the crisis can come very quickly. There's a pretty significant body of research out there that's showing that people can move from that ambivalence that I don't really want to live, but I don't really want to die either, into that's it, I'm going to take my life very rapidly. So if we all bank on catching that moment, we're going to miss it probably more often than not. And that's why I think, starting to practice our skill just to show up for people, in a positive and supportive way, whether we know they're struggling or don't know. We also know that lots of people aren't going to tell us, right? We're going to ask them and they're going to deny it. And so people will sometimes say, well, then why bother asking? Well, because when you ask somebody, even if they choose not to answer you, what you're doing is sort of creating a culture with them that says, I'm somebody you could talk to about this, right? So even if they don't answer you honestly, it's still worth being able to ask those questions.
So true. And I know you focus on a topic, you mentioned it earlier, soul exhaustion, that can impact how we engage people we're concerned about. I was hoping you could spend just a little bit of time kind of talking about how that all connects and how we stay in a good place to support others.
Yeah, Mark, again, rooted in my experiences as a suicide loss survivor, right? There's, all sorts of clinical language for the struggles that people face. We have depression, we have anxiety, we have major mental health conditions, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. We talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, which I prefer the word injury, but okay. But none of those things actually met what I experienced as a loss survivor. I had symptoms of several of them, right? But none of them spoke to the suffering I was experiencing. And what I realized is that we didn't have language to talk about what happens to who you are.
Yeah.
Right? Everything that we talk about is really about what's sort of happening to the brain or the mind, sometimes the body, but we're so much more than that. And there wasn't anything that really talked about who you are and what happened to that part. And so I started, kind of going down this journey of the term soul exhaustion, which, just so you know, other people have used it, but it's been used really in a spiritual context. I'm not using it in that spiritual context. I'm using it really specific to the other definition of the word soul, which is the true self, right? And so Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas and I did some research, really dug into what do people believe about this idea of the soul, and what does soul exhaustion mean when they hear the term? And what was exciting is that it was a pretty intuitive term. People heard it and they very quickly understood what I meant by it. And I don't like naming problems without looking for solutions. And so the solution in the context of soul exhaustion is a term we call soul care. And it's a much deeper level. I had a woman in one of my workshops say, if one more person tells me to light a candle and take a bubble bath, I'm going to, right? And it's true, because we have these people who have gone through so much hardship, so much pain, that who they are has been eroded to such an extent that they don't feel any connection to it anymore. They're not even sure who they are anymore. Lighting a candle and having a bubble bath is not going to turn that around.
Yeah.
So we did lots of research to try to find out what are the things that can. And we also did lots of research to find out what are the things that can happen in our lives that can erode our sense of self to that extent. And one of the things that came up was burnout. And of course, I work a lot with law enforcement, but I'm of the mental health field. And I have learned that if I want to stay in this work, and I do, because I love it, I have to take really good care of who I am. I can't allow myself to get pulled in and to experience all that vicarious traumatization. So we think about soul care as much deeper things, including things like, time as your most valuable currency, right? We talk a lot about budgeting money, but I would tell you the most valuable thing we have in this life is our time.
Yeah.
So encouraging people to think beyond the bubble bath, beyond the eating right, beyond the drinking lots of water. By the way, those are bare necessities, right? Those are all essentials. But what are the deeper things? And really claiming your time and space in this life. So that's soul exhaustion and soul care. It's a big part of my focus. And I think it relates a lot for people who do this work.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. It's just drives everything, right? If we're not kind of getting our own needs met, we're not going to be able to show up for others. Yeah. Well, Sarah, it's been such a pleasure getting to talk to you, and we really appreciate you sharing all of this. For people who are not going to be able to attend the event live, what's maybe one thing you would want them to know, to take away?
And the one thing I would want you to take away is never minimize the importance that you carry in people's lives. And it doesn't matter if that person is a friend, if that person is your child, is an extended family member, or if that person is somebody you walk by in a hallway. That when you take the time to do more than just say, hi, how are you? But you actually wait for their response, you're in a position of making somebody feel just a little bit more like they belong. And so really we can all walk around the world doing unknowingly on our part and unknowingly on the other person's part, but we can all walk around this world doing suicide prevention every day.
I love that, Sarah. And I think that's so true, and just such an important thing to hold on to every day. Like even those small interactions, like they matter. Well, thank you for that. We are so looking forward to getting to see you give your full presentation during the Afternoon of Hope, which again will be on September 10th from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. It's virtual, it's free, and you can sign up by visiting afternoonofhope.com. Well, again, thank you for taking the time to join us today, Mark. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Yep.
Sarah, thank you again so much for joining us today, and can't wait to see you on the 10th.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone.